Today in Python we're going to be learning about functions, and functions are a very powerful tool in not only Python but kind of all of programming. Before we get into this, we want to know what functions really are and why we want to use them. And the main idea behind them is code reusability. Functions allow you to reuse parts of code in your program so you don't have to rewrite it a lot. This saves you time and effort and memory space and a lot of things, and it's why we're going to be learning them today. So in Python, functions basically have a couple parts to them. First off is the name of the function. So in this one I'm going to name it print greeting. And then when you're making a function in the beginning, you have to put the def, which means define, in front. So you have your def space and then your function name, and then followed by parentheses. Now in these parentheses you have these things called arguments and keyword arguments. In this case we're only going to have one argument and we're going to call it name. You can have as many as you want, but you have to separate them by commas. So if I wanted also age, maybe school, I would have that. But in this example we're only going to use one argument called name. Now in here, when we hit return, we want to make sure this is indented so that we are in the scope of this function when we are writing it. So if we want this function to print out the name that we pass in here, we would write print name. If I go down here, the way I call this function would be print greeting, and then in here I would have to put a string, and I'll put my name. So now if I run this, you'll see it'll just print whatever we put in there. Now you might be asking, why would we use this example when we already have a print statement? And this example isn't very good at showing why. It's just a basic example of how functions work, what are the parts of them. If we wanted to make instead a greeting, like this is, and we wanted it to say hello, comma, and then the name, we would do hello in a string plus name in the print statement. Now if I put Liam and run it, it'll say hello Liam. Now the reason this is very useful is because instead of having to say print hello Liam, and if I wanted someone to print someone else's greeting, I would have to say print hello John and print hello Ashley. You see I had to write that 3 times. I had to write hello, hello, comma, hello, comma, hello, comma. That's a lot of work, and in programming we want to do the least amount of work as possible to get the desired results. So instead of doing that, I could say, so if I run this, you'll see that it'll say hello Liam, hello John, hello Ashley. Instead, if I didn't want to have to write all that out, I could just say print greeting John, print greeting Ashley. See what this does is when I run this, it does the same thing, but instead of having to write the print hello, comma, space, and then the name, all I had to do was put in the name. That's because we already defined what we want to print before up here when we call upon this. What we're basically doing is we're passing in this string that's in between these parentheses into this line of code up here. So it always calls upon this part of our program. Now if we want to do something more complex, functions aren't just defined by integers. They can be lists, dictionaries, tuples. You can have really almost any data type passed in and returned as from a function. So let's say I wanted to take a list of integers and I wanted to return that list, but every single number in there was squared. So if I said define squared ints. I'll say ints. And this is what we're going to use is the return statement. First, we're going to want to modify this by using a for loop. So we'll say for int in, or number in ints. We will say this new list that we'll create, squared, make it empty. We'll say squared dot append, and then in this is the append method. Remember, we'll just say number squared. And at the end of this for loop, we will return squared. Now, if I run this, get rid of this. If I run this and call upon this function, and in here we'll put a list of integers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If I run this, you'll see that it doesn't actually print anything, because what all this does is it calls upon this function and it returns this value. It's not printing anything to the screen. So instead we have to say print this. Now if we run this, it'll print the returned value from this when we pass this list in. So 1, 4, 9, 16, and 25 are the squared values of 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. You can see how this is really useful in code, because if you had in your code somewhere multiple uses where you had to square something and your boss said, okay, now we want to cube the number instead of square it, you would have to go in through and change every single time this shows up, you would have to change that from a 2 to a 3. Whereas here, all you would have to do is go back up to this function and go to the squared.append number, asterisk, asterisk, and then just change the 2 to a 3. Now if we run this, it'll return all these numbers cubed. So 1 cubed is 1, 2 cubed is 8, 3 cubed is 27, 4 cubed is 64, and 5 cubed is 125. Now it's great that we are returning this, but this printing it, we're not actually assigning it to any variable. So if I wanted to assign this to a variable, I can. I would say, let's call this values. We'll have these values, we'll change this back to a 2 just for simplicity. And down here, if we wanted to now access these squared integers, all we would have to do is do values, and then in here access the index of the list that was returned. So if we wanted to return 2 squared, we would do 1, because it is the second spot in a list. And if you recall from the lists video, the way list indexes work is it goes 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. So it actually starts at 0. So if we wanted to access 2 squared, we would need to go 0, 1. So we do 1. Now if we print this, it'll print 4, which is exactly the value we wanted. So the last thing about about functions that I want to get on is something called arguments and keyword arguments. As I said before, functions in these parentheses have things called arguments and keyword arguments in it. We've only really worked with arguments so far. I'm going to quickly show you what a keyword argument looks like. So let's say we wanted it to return cubed values if we had the cubed keyword argument set to true. So we'll say cubed equals false. So by default, we'll say if cubed, and then here we'll just just do, I think it's, just trying to indent it. Say if cubed, however, let me just copy this. So what we're saying here is if this is true, which it currently isn't, it is currently set to false, we are going to return a list of cubed values. That's what this 3 is. If it's not cubed, we're going to return a list of squared values. So the point of doing this is when you're calling upon the function, and you input your list, I'm just going to make a list of numbers. There we go. Once we make our list and we say nums, and if we wanted to have cubed values be returned, we would set cubed equal to true here. It's necessary that we do this cubed equals true in order for it to work. If we just said true, this wouldn't actually work. There would actually be an error that would pop up. It would say, yeah, this is not what we want. So we would have to do cubed equals true. There we go. So what arguments and keyword arguments are is basically you're taking an amount of arguments that can be any amount. It can be 1, can be 2, can be 3, can be 10. It doesn't matter. So if I wanted to say print student info, and in here I said star args and then star quargs. What this says is any arguments that we pass in, we're going to do something to that. Any keyword arguments we pass in, we're going to do something to that. Remember, a keyword argument is separated by the variable name equals and then whatever we defaultly set it to. So if I said print args, print quargs, we go down here and we'll say print student info. I'll say me 18, and here we'll say school equals LNHS. Favorite color blue. So if I print this out now, you'll see that it returns in the arguments a tuple of the arguments that we set in, and for keyword arguments it returns a dictionary of the name of the variable separated by a colon with the value that we actually pass in. So that's how keyword arguments and arguments work as well in functions. That's really all for this lesson.